Hello and welcome to this live streaming from the Nordic House in Reykjavík, where we are starting a debate titled A Queer Utopia, the Dissonance Between Legal Rights and Social Acceptance in Iceland. And this meeting will be held in English, and I hope all of you taking part and watching are okay with that. I will be the moderator today. My name is Felix Bergsson, and I am an actor, singer, and a TV and radio presenter here in Iceland. I'm also the head of delegation for Iceland in the Eurovision Song Contest, and I find that that is always of a lot of interest in the queer society. I came out as a gay man in 1992, and for years I was very involved in the struggle for queer rights in Iceland. I have been married to my husband for 21 years. We have 2 children, and since this summer we have 2 grandchildren as well. And that is a scenario that I found almost impossible to imagine when I stumbled out of the closet in the early 90s. But it says a lot about the constant changes in the life of queer people all over the world in the last 30 years or so, and it says a lot about the changes that can happen in the years to come. This meeting is the 5th meeting out of 8 in this row of seminars initiated by the Nordic Council of Ministers, focusing on the rights and well-being of LGBTQI+ people in the Nordic states, with the aim of strengthening the protection and improving the lives of queer people throughout the region. We have already had great meetings, and there will be meetings after this one in Nuuk, Copenhagen, and Tromsø. And this meeting is organized by Samtökin 78, the queer organization in Iceland, and the Nordic House here in Reykjavík. And the aim of the meeting is to shed light on obstacles regarding the legal status of queer people in Iceland and engage in discussion on how they can be improved to ensure the well-being and safety of queer people in Iceland. And points for discussion raised here will be: why does Iceland score the lowest of the Nordic countries on the ILGA-Europe Rainbow Map? And does Iceland still have a long way to go when it comes to safeguarding the rights and well-being of queer people? Points and recommendations from the debate here today will be compiled in a think piece used in the work of the Nordic Council of Ministers to improve the rights and well-being of queer people in the Nordic region. And this meeting is being live streamed, and for those of you watching through Facebook, feel free to ask your questions and comments there, and put your comments there, and we will take a note of them. We have great speakers today, but let's start with the Prime Minister of Iceland, which is also the Minister for Equality. We are very grateful to her for being with us during these strange and challenging times. So here is Katrín Jakobsdóttir.
Dear guests, it's my pleasure to be with you here today, and our topic is an important one. Why does Iceland score the lowest of the Nordic countries on the ILGA-Europe Rainbow Map? Do we have a long way to go when it comes to safeguarding the rights and well-being of queer people? I'd like to start off by saying that I'm a strong believer in policies. I believe in the power of policies because I have seen them work. When we want to accelerate progress towards equality, practical policies can often be a huge part of the solution. Some people, and they are usually speaking from a place of privilege, we all know the type, may say that policies designed to promote equality are unnecessary, and they might deem them too controversial when they are put in place. But the fact of the matter remains, such policies hasten the process of getting us closer to equality. Once these policies are in place, they secure and safeguard important milestones. And yes, it is necessary to safeguard human rights, as we cannot take progress that we have achieved for granted. We see the backlash when it comes to the human rights and well-being of queer people worldwide, and there is reason to be alarmed. So what are we doing here in Iceland, and how are we striving to do better, as we have fallen behind other Nordic countries in relation to trans and intersex rights? We have been aware that we can do better. And for this reason, my government announced at the outset of our term a strong will to put an emphasis on LGBTI rights, and in accordance with the recent recommendations of the Council of Europe on intersex people's human rights. I moved the equality portfolio, including the LGBTI issues, from the Ministry of Welfare to my office and created a new Department of Equality in January 2019 within the Prime Minister's office. And although the equality issues now fall under this new office, various issues relating to LGBTI rights also belong to other ministries and institutions, including the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Justice. When we look at some recent laws, I am especially pleased with the new Act on Gender Autonomy, which was one of the first tasks of the new Department of Equality in the Prime Minister's office. It ensures the right of every person 18 years and older to change their gender registration in Registers Iceland. And with the change in gender registration, the applicant also has the right to a name change. No medical requirements can be made for the gender registration change, such as surgical operations, medication, hormonal treatments, psychiatric or psychological therapy. Gender-neutral registration is also permitted, and these laws are extremely important for the rights of queer people and instrumental in the jump Iceland took up the ILGA-Europe Rainbow Map between 2019 and 2020. Then we have the Act on Equal Treatment in the Workplace from 2018 that prohibits employment discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics, and sexual expression. In addition to this, I have presented three new bills in the Parliament that will further improve the rights of queer people, and we are actually discussing them today in Parliament. The bill amending the Act on Personal Autonomy, which adds a provision to the Act concerning changes in sex characteristics of children born with atypical sex characteristics, as well as an act that lowers the age limit from 18 to 15 years old in regard to the rights of changing one's gender registration. The third bill puts in place necessary changes to ensure the rights of trans and intersex people, including the Act on Artificial Fertilization and use of human gametes and embryos for stem cell research. And then we have the fourth bill that the Minister of Justice will put forth that puts in place changes to the Children Act to ensure the rights of trans and intersex people. Now that I have mentioned new and important laws we have put in place and bills of law that we hope will become law before the end of this year, I would like to add that it's not enough to change the legal framework and then sit back and take a rest. We must always be mindful of safeguarding social acceptance as well, and these aspects have to go hand in hand if we want to see true change. And we do this by having an open dialogue about the rights and well-being of queer people, by educating, by listening, and by always speaking up when we witness hate, prejudice, and discrimination. We are all part of this effort. We cannot leave the fight for equality up to those within the LGBTI community only. It is of great importance to all of us that society is equal and accepting to everyone, and we cannot rest until this has become our reality. It is my wish that the new legislation not only will move us closer to equality, but that it will move Iceland up the list of ILGA-Europe as well. We jumped up 4 seats this year, and we aim to keep moving upwards. Thank you, and I wish you all a fruitful and insightful talk here today.
Thank you, Katrín Jakobsdóttir. That was very interesting and a lot there that she said, which will make queer people in Iceland very happy. Our next speaker is with us from Norway. His name is Gísli Agledal, and in Iceland we know him for the great TV show Jævla Homo, or in my English translation, Bloody Poof, something like that. Helvítis Hommi. Gisli is kind of a key listener in the seminar because he's going to write a report to the Nordic Council of Ministers on the issues that he picks out from this row of seminars. And today Gisli will talk about the background and the inspiration for the meetings. So, Gisli, take it away.
Hi everyone, thank you for the introduction, Felix. I'm really happy to be here with you tonight. I wish I could be there physically as well, but I was really looking forward to visiting Iceland, but hopefully another time. Felix, you already said a bit about it, but I'm here to tell you what the Nordic Council of Ministers will be doing with the knowledge and the insight that you guys are providing today. But first, I'm going to tell you a bit about my part in this and why I'm here. So I work as a journalist, as Felix said, and one of the areas that is the most important to me are the issues regarding the LGBTQIA+ community. I'm a part of the community myself. I recently moved in with my boyfriend, and I know now I live a life where I feel safe, and I'm proud and I'm happy. But unfortunately, it hasn't always been like that. For many years, I was too afraid to explore my identity and my sexual orientation. I felt unsafe and I felt like I didn't belong. And I guess in my darkest moments, it was almost as if I felt that there was something wrong with me. And when I read about tonight's topics, I felt that it really resonated because the headline is very much relevant for Norway as well. Even though we've come a long way in terms of legal rights here in Norway, the society still has a way to go when it comes to acceptance and societal norms and expectations and how you're supposed to live your life. So while I was having a hard time figuring out who I was and I guess like finding my place in this world, I made the documentary series Felix mentioned. And for me, I guess the series was about my struggle to feel proud and to feel safe and at peace with my sexuality and my identity. And throughout the series, I delved into this large, amazing and complex and a little scary queer world that I had been too afraid to approach on my own. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned about the LGBTQIA+ community and about the world surrounding us. And through all that, and especially through meeting and learning from some of the most wonderful people I've ever met, something truly changed inside of me. And I'm now thankful to be who I am. And I feel safe and I feel loved for who I am. But I know, and I'm sure all of you know as well, that feeling that way about yourself when you're queer in some way, that's not the case for everyone here in the Nordic countries. A lot of people face difficulties related to their gender and to their sexuality. A lot of people have more complex or difficult challenges than I have ever faced. And even though we've come a long way in a short time, and there's a lot to celebrate in terms of progress, but we still have a way to go. And that's why I'm so grateful and excited for the work that the Nordic Council of Ministers are trying to do with these issues and what they're doing with this series of seminars. Every country and every area will have a seminar and a debate like the one tonight here in Reykjavík with a different topic for each place. And I will attend each of the debates as a key listener. And that means that what you guys are saying here tonight, I will be writing it all down. I will edit it and I will write a larger think piece with the most important takeaways from the conversations. And then the ministers in each area will then use all of that knowledge and the thoughts that come up in these debates, along with some new research to figure out what political change needs to happen next. And to put it in their own wording, their goal is to achieve equal rights, treatment, and opportunities for LGBTI people in the Nordic region. So before I let you guys continue, I wanted to show you a short video from Jävla Homo. It's a little heavy to watch, but I think it shows the gravity of these issues and why it's important and crucial that we continue to work towards change. The scene that I want to play for you is it's from a trip I took to Finnmark, which is way up north in Norway, where I met this boy named Lemmet. And Lemmet is Sápmi, and he told me that he is the only gay guy in Karasjok. which is where I meet him. And he says that there used to be a lot more queer people there, like his big brother, for example, but the other queer people, they're not alive anymore. He's the only one left. Okay, let's see the video.
Det er her de legges for å glemmes, ofte.
Why? Wait.
Det er dypt.
Ja.
Jeg vet ikke om vennene hans vet at han er begravd.
Hva sa du?
Lasse sine venner.
Ja.
Han hadde jo masse venner i Oslo.
Hva med de?
Om de i det hele tatt vet at han ligger begravd her oppe.
For de fikk ikke beskjed?
Nei. Men Lasse Andre Risvik, min bror, han er en av de mange homsene her som har tatt selvmord. Han var en drag queen fra Karasjok.
Hvem var han?
Han var en pratsom person.
Ja.
Han var sånn partygirl. Elsket å feste og... Men det kan jeg jo skjønne når man kommer fra Karasjok. Er annerledes enn andre, kommer til Oslo og plutselig passer man inn. Men man kan jo ikke si at han passet inn heller, for han gjorde jo på en måte det heller. Han prøvde å finne seg selv i Berlin og London og reiste forskjellige steder for å finne seg selv, men han fant det ikke helt. Og man kan jo tenke seg om problemet ligger i å være homo, eller om problemet ligger i alt annet livet byr på, men det er mange homser som tar livet sitt her. Og min første forelskelse, han ligger også her. Min første kjæreste. Og hvordan skal man tolke det? Hva skal man tenke? Hva skal man si?
And I'm sorry to say that not only was his big brother and his first boyfriend there, but also his best friend, and he knew of others as well. So what we just saw was a cemetery filled with young people, and I guess like that's why we're here today, because even though we've come a long way, we're not quite there yet, unfortunately. I want to say that if anyone feels like there's something they forgot to say, or if there's something you want to put more emphasis on, or you have any more information for me, please don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm looking forward to learning from all of you tonight, and I'll be here listening and taking notes. So I want to say good luck and thank you so much.
Gisle, our key listener. So let's focus again on Iceland and the situation in our country for queer people, especially when it comes to the law. And here we have a second Katrín of the day. Katrín Oddsdóttir is a human rights lawyer and an activist. Currently, her main focus of activism is the installation of the new Icelandic constitution. But today, Katrín will talk about the legal status of queer people in Iceland. Katrín Oddsdóttir, vær så god.
Ja, hello. Yes, my name is Katrín Oddsdóttir. Thank you so much for having me here today. I have sensed the theme that we will introduce our queerness at the beginning of our talk, so I will proudly announce that I have a wife and 2 kids, and I've had this wonderful wife for a lot of years, since 2006 actually. So sometimes when you zoom out and realize the situation in the world with many nations, you just find this immense gratitude of being born here in Iceland. So thank you, Gisli, for your film and for sharing his story. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the queer paradise of Iceland, if you like. We, of course, heard from Katrín Jakobsdóttir that work is in progress with our parliament, and we have actually gone up the rainbow map between years now. But let's look at the situation. So what we have here is a slide. The first picture you see there is from a magazine called Samuel, and this picture is from an interview with a guy called Hörður Torfason, who was this amazing, sexy actor slash songwriter slash troubadour in Iceland, who came out of the closet full force, first of all people, I think, in such a way, such a public way, in 1975. Hörður, following this interview, was completely ostracized and persecuted. And in the end, he had to flee to Denmark, where he was subject to a murder attempt and just had to continue fleeing his destiny. So he went from being sort of Iceland's chosen boy to being completely unwanted and hated in Iceland back in 1975 because of his sexual orientation. But Hörður didn't give up, and the reason why I'm putting this photo up there is to explain that we achieve policies and rights through the fight we have to do. And we have to continue fighting, and we can't rest. And I have to stress that being from Iceland, although we have problems here with legislation, like I will explain, it still is a very privileged situation. And if we don't use that privilege to advance the rights of our family, queer, we have to fight for our people everywhere. And Hörður did that. He came back home to Iceland, and he kept playing his music in every little small town in Iceland, even though nobody would come and listen to him year after year. He used to wash floors in Denmark to get money to come back every year and just be a visible human being. And slowly, with the fight of Hörður and other people who joined him, we managed to change the situation. And if you look there to the other photo you can see the Pride in Reykjavík in 2015. At that point, it had gone much bigger than our national holiday, our Independence Day. It's sort of the day that everybody shows up, and such solidarity forming in only a few decades is actually remarkable from the perspective of any human rights battle anywhere in the world. So I just wanted to flick this up just to give you a sort of short historic overview of what has been achieved in regards to the society in Iceland. So one guy stepping forth being completely persecuted in 75 to this where you see there in 2015, the whole nation celebrating together. Okay, but this is still the overall situation in Iceland in regards to our legislation. And this is, of course, a disgrace. Let's face it. If you look at the numbers more clearly, you can see that we're only scoring 38% when it comes to equality and non-discrimination. And I bet you would go to the street in Iceland and ask any Icelandic citizen what they would guess was the status of the legislation. They would guess a much, much higher score. I think the actual knowledge of the people who live here in regards to where we stand is quite low. I think people in Iceland believe that the battle has been won and we are all equal, and it's only a matter of fixing small things that are being fixed now to get where we want to be, but that certainly is not the case. We can also look at family, whereas we score quite high, I guess, with 83%. Hate crimes and hate speech, we're 26% of what we want to see, and legal gender recognition and bodily integrity, 70%. We can be very happy about civil society space, where we can, of course, like you saw in the picture from 2015, have our meetings and do what we want in our civil society space, and 100% legislation score there. But then we look at the asylum part, and we see a lousy 17%. Now, this is not something that anybody in Iceland would like to pride themselves of. I can promise you that. So what do we need to do? Well, how can we first of all understand this picture with a reference to something that's similar to ourselves, because, okay, we are doing worst of all the Nordic countries, like we know, according to the Rainbow Map, but we can always say then, okay, yeah, but we are small and we are slow in implementing it, and we already have it, so nobody's is suffering, although this is just a practical matter. No, it's not true. This is the map that we're talking about and referencing, and you see Iceland up there in this sort of light green color. We want to be dark green. And let's talk about how to get there. Iceland and Malta are actually quite comparable in many ways. They're both small European islands. They have a small population. In Iceland, we are about 364,000, and in Malta, there's about 515,000. Both countries are actually former colonies also, which is interesting. Those numbers have gotten royally messed up there, I see. But we can see the colors, nevertheless, that we are scoring quite poorly compared to Malta. The green area is the total number according to the Rainbow Map, and the red one is what's missing. So here we go. So if we, for example, look at the overall situation in the asylum category, you can see that Malta is scoring way better than Iceland, but still has a long way to go with 33%, in contrast to our 17%. But how come then do we see asylum seekers fleeing from Malta to Iceland? That is a fact that the people from the Samtökin 78 have shared, that we do see people coming from Malta to here. And this again raises the big question between legal status and reality. And what I explained in the first slide about the Icelandic reality, and this is sort of maybe the heart of the conversation going on in this room, I guess, is that we do need policies to advance the societies, but sometimes the policymakers also have to get their act together and move as fast as the societies. And I guess in Iceland, the society itself is, in a way, light years ahead of their legislator. And it has been, in my opinion, for the whole time in the struggle for queer rights in Iceland. The people have gone forth, then the legislator has sort of finally caught up, and then the church is somewhere limping behind, slowly, slowly. But sometimes it's at least presumably trying to catch up. So we can say that we're on the right track. These are my kids there on a gay track, I guess, or a queer track. And this is a little bit of a list that I would like to send to the authorities in Iceland here. First of all, just acknowledge the fact that society is preceding you as a legislator. And acknowledge it openly and tell the people of Iceland that this is a situation, that we are lagging behind of the Nordic countries and behind places like Malta, which have quite comparable demographics to our nation. So we need to fix it, and I suggest we would fix it in the following orders. We would start by making sure that asylum seekers have the legislative frameworks that they could actually come to Iceland and totally rely on our legislation. Now, it is a fact that people who are queer and are fleeing persecution come to Iceland. They know that the social situation here is quite good. But if you just look at the legislation alone, the protection is not there. And that means that if we find ourselves in a situation where the politics have taken a weird turn, they could easily have been thrown away, and we could not protect them in the way that we want as a society. So this needs to be fixed immediately, in my opinion. Next thing to fix immediately is hate crime and hate speech legislation. And we feel it. If we go online here in Iceland, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of this nation supports queer people and them being equal to everybody else, we still see people commenting in a hurtful and hateful way on the grounds of people's sexual orientation without anything being done about it. And this needs to be changed, I think. I think we need to find ourselves in a situation where we don't allow ourselves to go down this slippery slope of hate speech, because even though the freedom of speech is the most important one of the most important human rights you can find, there's a really good reason for the limitation. And hate speech is one of that excellent limitations we do put on free speech. Now, the next thing they're going to fix, Katrin and friends, after they have fixed the asylum legislation and the hate crime and hate speech legislation, is the equality and non-discrimination legislation. I was glad to hear that they have done the workplace legislation already, but more work needs to be done. And then, of course, they do need to finish a really important job in regards to intersex children and preventing them from being subject to surgeries in a very young age. And I can feel it that this is going to be a political struggle in Iceland. There's a certain party that already has put themselves against this, and it's, in my humble opinion, disgraceful that we're having this conversation in our parliament, and I really hope we manage to somehow get out of that dark pit that this party is putting us in. And finally, the family legislation needs to be finalized. So it might sound like a long to-do list, but like Katrin Jakobsdóttir said, policies are the first thing to go forth with when you are a policy maker. So I just hope that this to-do list will be at the front of our desk tomorrow. That was me for now. Any questions?
Questions afterwards?
Yeah, no questions. Don't even try to ask questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katrin. Yes, we will go through the questions later. And I remind you that when all our speakers have taken to the podium, we will have a panel discussion here with good social distancing. And we would very much like to have your input. So please prepare your questions, send them to us through the Facebook chat on the live streaming event. Moving swiftly on, Katrin got us back on track in time, which was great. We next hear from Þorbjörg Þorvaldsdóttir, President of the National Queer Organization of Iceland, Samtökin 78. Þorbjörg is a linguist and a queer activist, and the headline for her talk is Investing in Queer Rights. Investing in Queer Rights. Þorbjörg Þorvaldsdóttir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Felix. And thank you, everybody who has spoken before me. Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself and my queerness as well, since everybody's doing it. Can't resist it. So I'm bisexual. I've been out since I was 18. And incidentally, I've also been in a relationship with my current wife since I was 18. So that is my story. I have 2 kids. And yes, okay, so on to the formal speech. Dear guests, it is a great pleasure to have the opportunity to address this meeting and to discuss this important issue for Iceland as well as for the other Nordic countries. As we have just heard in Katrin Oddsdóttir's talk, there is dissonance, a gap, if you will, between the societal acceptance of LGBTIQ+ people in Iceland and our legal rights. Survey after survey has shown that we here in Iceland are in fact leaders on a global level when it comes to the societal acceptance of queer people. However, we still lag behind on legal protections, policy, and other positive governmental measures. This is true when we compare Iceland to other Nordic nations, and this is also true when we compare Iceland to the rest of Europe. So, while Iceland is no utopia, no country is, frankly, it is one of the most accepting nations on earth. At the same time, to name a few things, there is no law that tackles violent hate crime in Iceland. There is no ban on conversion therapy. And there's no specific law that protects queer asylum seekers. Here in Iceland, we are often celebrated, but we are not always protected. This is a fact, and in my mind, this is a rather embarrassing fact. A very embarrassing fact, actually. But the good thing about embarrassing facts is that they can be useful if we use them to spur ourselves into action. And the questions that people following today's event might be asking themselves is, how do we do better then? New laws and measures for the protection and welfare of a minority group in society certainly do not just come to light on their own. The title of my talk has probably given my main point away. Countries that want to secure human rights for all people and install protections, policy, and positive measures on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex characteristics must invest in queer rights. And what do I mean by invest? Invest time, invest funds, and invest in people. Invest time. There is a fundamental difference between allies in spirit and allies who are ready to invest their time and work on behalf of the queer community. Iceland has multiple politicians that are allies and supporters of queer rights, and in that we are extremely lucky. We really are. Painting rainbow streets and openly celebrating pride as an ally to queer people is a great thing. However, it is another thing entirely to speak up on our behalf and to protect and push for our rights, even when it isn't easy. And one thing that our allies that have political power can advocate for and decide on is the investment of funds. Yes, we need financial security for NGOs like Samtökin 78, like the organization that I lead. As an organization, we are absolutely vital in providing services and support to queer people in this country. And when funds are granted to NGOs, it must be done with long-term contracts. To quote a real example, recently we had to let all of our staff go, just in case, because our funding isn't secure from year to year. We hope to be able to rehire everyone as soon as new contracts are made, but this instability for the largest queer organization in Iceland is not sustainable. This should not have to be our main concern. Also, we shouldn't be the only ones working towards equality. The public sector should invest in people. When it comes to legal rights and concrete systemic change, we need more people. We need specialists in queer issues appointed to positions within both government bodies and within municipalities. Apart from the amazing 4-person staff of Samtökin 78, there is only one person in the entire nation that has a full-time job focused solely on queer issues. Her name is Sanna. She works for the city of Reykjavík. I hope she's watching. So Iceland can do much better. And I'm sure that other Nordic countries can too, in this regard. I am happy that the current Icelandic government, led by Prime Minister Katrín Jakobsdóttir, has taken concrete steps in the right direction over the past few years. Supported by almost everyone in the opposition, I should also note. We finally have workplace protections in place. We have new laws that secure gender autonomy. The government has shown, and this is especially true when it comes to global leadership and initiative, that Iceland wants to lead on queer rights. We have shown that. We are on the right path, but we must do better and never lose sight of the goal, which is, or at least should be, to occupy the first place of the ILGA-Europe Rainbow Map. At least that's our goal, and I think we as a nation should share that goal so that we don't feel embarrassed anymore. But to end this talk on a sober note, there is good reason to invest in queer rights these days. Fascism, homophobia, and especially anti-trans rhetoric is on the rise across our continent. Now is not the time to ignore queer rights or to pretend that our relatively safe place in society is everlasting. We cannot face the storm without proper anchoring. Legal rights must be secured. Thank you.
Takk, Þorbjörg. Very interesting points you came out with there. And I again remind everybody that, that we will have a panel discussion here later, and then they will answer your questions if there are any. So please send them to us through the Facebook live event. Our next speaker is an avid activist for intersex people in Iceland. They will talk about growing up intersex, but the issue has been in the media recently and is connected to a new legislation being discussed in the Icelandic Parliament, Alþingi. Bríet Finnsdóttir is a queer intersex activist who has been out and proud since they were 10 years old. They are the vice chair of Intersex Iceland and currently studies music at the Icelandic University of the Arts, while coping through COVID-19 by reading way too many fantasy novels. But that's another story. Here is Bríet Finnsdóttir.
Oh no, I think so, hello. I'm going to talk about my life in depth. So let's just begin at the beginning. It was a beautiful summer's day, roughly 24 years ago, when I was born. I was handed to my mother, and she said she's just like her cousin. The midwives asked, what does he mean with this? And she explained, well, she is intersex. My mom was treated like she had said something horrible. But a few days later, it was confirmed I am intersex. But after my diagnosis, my birth was kind of treated like somewhat of a tragedy. But my parents disagreed. They thought I was perfect just the way I was. They, of course, knew nothing. Let's fast forward 8 months. And I am the child from hell. I never slept, and I cried so loud I woke up the neighbors, and I didn't even live in a flat. So, yeah, it turned out I had a hernia, which needed fixing, and since I was already going under the knife, the doctor strongly recommended to remove my internal testes. If they were not removed, I would get cancer and die. Pretty sound reasoning, right? So my testes were quickly removed with the permission of my parents. This information was wrong. I don't know whether the doctor knew that at the time, but growing up, my internal testes would have been no more cancerous than any other part of my body. The removal of my testes were not only unnecessary, it deprived me of the ability to produce my own hormones. However, there's one thing I want to comment on. My mother never forgets. Directly after the surgery, when the first thing the surgeon told her, they will need more surgeries. Not the surgery was successful, or not even your child is alive. The surgeon's first priority was to tell her that I, the 8-month-old baby, needed a functioning vagina. To this day, I haven't got that surgery, and I can tell you it works perfectly fine. But yeah, let's fast forward to a 3-year-old me. My parents, discover the support group for women with androgen insensitivity in the UK, just like I am. This was a huge deal because they were told I was unique. So rare I would never meet anyone like me, except for my cousin. It was total isolation. Outside of my family, my parents had no one to talk to, seek advice, and share worries. But now there was a bunch of people, just like me, and many of them had been in similar situations. My parents read through stories of other people all day long, and one thing stood out. The story of a family that didn't live in hiding. They had a special child, and people knew that and didn't judge. That was when my parents decided to drop the curtain of shame. And oh boy, what a curtain of shame it was. No kidding, this is what my doctor told me, or told my parents, pardon my Icelandic. Farið með þetta eins og mannsmorð. Treat it like you just murdered someone. Yeah. When I was 12 years old, I was prescribed hormones to compensate for my removed testes, and that is when my illness began. It took many years, but slowly it chipped away all my energy. Initially, I had a lot of it, so I just dropped gymnastics. But then I stopped going out after dinner. I just didn't have the energy. And then meeting my friends after school was just too much. And finally, school was too much. My attendance dropped. I struggled with my homework, and my grades dropped out as well. I spent all my energy to do the menial things others didn't even think about, like focusing on sitting in a classroom. There was no room for learning when all your mental capacity is sitting. I got tired from walking up a flight of stairs, and I had to pause halfway because I just couldn't do it. And I could only remember what to do or where to be, not both. When I thought I couldn't lose anymore, I lost my mental health. I had no future, or at least the future I had was not worth living. I was a zombie, living without being actually alive. This was a time I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. Why wasn't something done, you might ask? And well, for a time, things were being done. Endless experiments on medications and dosages, all of them far too low. But after some well-worded criticism, my doctor dumped me. Despite having previously told my parents and me that he did not want me to transition to adult care until in my 20s. But I had just turned 18, and since they were a pediatrician, they weren't obliged to see me anymore. So without a referral, I had no one to turn to for 2 years. Eventually, I got a meeting with the people from the Directorate of Health, and I am assigned a new doctor, and yeah, but it did come with a price. The years of hormone mismanagement had taken a permanent toll, and to be honest, the experiments are still going on. Only now they're getting better at guessing, and finally are more often listening to how I feel and not just looking at the numbers in the box. Wouldn't it just have been easier to not take my internal testes, to not operate on my intersex body, and just let my body do what my body was designed to do? Instead, they horribly mishandled things manually. Yeah. Iceland has been in a pretty good situation for some time in the matters of social acceptance. Well, of queer matters. And thankfully, I have never gotten any negative reactions from the society. But in everyday society, we can allow our emotions to judge. In the case of the medical system, protocol is key. That is why intersex legal framework is just as important, if not more, regarding to the intersex rights. You see, we are at the mercy of this protocol, and even though the protocol is outdated and harmful, to get any change, you must change it from the legal perspective. I think we can all agree that our children deserve the best possible. So shouldn't we use the newest, the best science for our future? But how does then outdated science built on homophobia and prejudice fit into this? Because that is what those surgeries are on intersex children. They're used to normalize sex characteristics so the children will fit into the neat box of male and female. Too large of a clitoris will result in lesbianism. Too feminine of a boy will result in him being gay. There's nothing scientific about that. No one should regulate the shape of our children's bodies based on societal reasoning, especially when those areas are the most sensitive part of the human body. So, my words to the medical system: before anything, first do no harm. That is what our children deserve, and that is the best we can offer. Let us be. Thanks.
Tack, Bríet. Tack. Yes, I think we have a lot to think about after hearing this talk and all the talks here. So remember, you are allowed to ask when when we get all the panelists here up. And now we move on to a talk named Hate Crime and Hate Speech Against Queer People in Iceland. The speaker is Ugla Stefania Kristjánudóttir Jónsdóttir, gender expert, trans activist, filmmaker, columnist, and author. They will speak to us from their home in the UK. Ugla runs the film project My Generation and are the chair of Trans Iceland. So, Ugla, wonderful to have you with us. Take it away.
Thank you, Felix. It's great to be here with everyone, even if it's remotely, but it's kind of fitting for the times, I suppose. As Felix said, I'm currently in the UK, where I sort of live part-time. I also do a lot of stuff in Iceland, thankfully still. I am going to announce my queerness, like everybody else before me. And I am going to, I identify as a trans person, obviously, and I am also bisexual, so I fit more than one letter on the spectrum, which I think a lot of people sometimes do in our wonderful queer community. But I was going to speak a bit about hate crime and hate speech in Iceland. And as was mentioned before by Katrín Oddsdóttir, hate crimes and hate speech isn't specifically defined in Icelandic law. And the only sort of legal article that mentions is in the Icelandic Penal Code, which is Almenn Hegningalög. And that specifically states that people cannot mock, tarnish, or threaten a group or a person because of their nationality, color of their skin, race, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And these most recent addition of gender identity only came in 2017. And it does not include sexual characteristics, which includes intersex people. So even if there is some sort of a legislation, it isn't covering all forms of queerness. And I think this law has not actually been put into practice much, and there's only been a handful of cases ever in the history of Iceland where there's actually been a conviction, and I think it's been about 3 in total. And 2 of these actually include cases where Samtökin, or the National Queer Organization of Iceland, sued a number of people following that there was going to be queer education in the town of Hafnarfjörður. And following on from this, there was a really visceral and a really toxic debate about queer rights and about queer education. And throughout a 2-year process, the legal system actually found 2 people to be in breach of this. And the comments that they made were made online, and they were quite severe. And they basically were all the sort of typical things that you hear about queer people, whether that's being gay or bi or trans. And it's about that it's some sort of a perversion, and, you know, it's connected to pedophilia in one way or another. And this is a common theme that we always see in the sort of hate speech that's directed at queer people. And it's interesting to think that this sort of clause in Iceland that's supposed to protect people against hate speech has rarely actually been used and tested in the legal system. But hate speech and hate crimes and all of these things don't exist in some sort of vacuum. And when we hear hate speech, it's important that we have ways to combat it, because the first step towards things becoming more serious is people being able to say really extreme and really toxic and really anti-LGBT things without any sort of consequence. And unfortunately, hate speech in Iceland is still a massive issue. And you only have to take a look in the comment section of most media platforms in Iceland to be able to find really negative and toxic comments. And this happens on pretty much every article there is about LGBT issues. And specifically when it comes down to more marginalized groups like trans people or intersex people. And these media platforms often do not do much about it. It's only when things get really, really extreme when they might remove or moderate some comments, but usually these comments are just allowed to be there regardless of what they say. And these media platforms also sometimes publish things written by people that have really, really negative and really, really harmful views about LGBT people. And also just things that could be considered propaganda or even disinformation. And I think a recent example of this was an Icelandic psychologist that wrote an article about trans people, where the whole article was based on complete rubbish, really. And this was published in a mainstream media platform without any question and without any criticism. And when criticism was brought on this, both by LGBT organizations, the healthcare system, and everybody involved, nothing was done about it. And this article to this day still is up on that website and is actually a widely really read article on their platform. So it's really difficult to know how to deal with this when the media itself is not doing anything about it, because they have a massive influence on people's opinion and how people see things. And hate speech is only the start of something greater and can lead to something such as hate crimes. And hate crimes aren't specifically defined by law in Iceland either, so there isn't an overarching definition of what it is, what a hate crime is. So it's hard to sometimes pinpoint where exactly that is and how that begins. But according to research about hate crimes, both in Iceland and in many other countries, queer people are less likely to report hate crimes due to their lack of confidence in the police and the authorities, because they don't think there will be anything done about it, and they don't think the police and the authorities are able to take things as seriously as they should. And all around the world, we're seeing hate crimes being recorded on the rise, including in Iceland. And there was a recent article, I think about 2 years ago, by a person that was specifically working on hate crimes in Iceland, saying that there was an increase in reports of hate crimes against trans people. And there are many examples of hate crimes in Iceland. I think anybody that follows this in the media is able to think of at least a few different cases, but I guess that's only the tip of the iceberg, because we only hear about certain things in the media. There's, of course, a lot more that are reported and never go public, and then there's a wider range of hate crimes that never even get reported in the first place. But just to make a few examples just from last year, things that I remembered on the top of my head when I was creating this lecture was that in 2019, a gay man was attacked downtown after replying yes when his attacker asked him if he was a gay man. And as a result, he was violently attacked and punched by his attacker. And also in the same year, a trans woman was, the same trans woman was on 2 separate occasions attacked downtown simply for going about her business and going out like everybody else. And it seems that a lot of these cases specifically happen when people are downtown or when people are clubbing and when people are doing these things. So it seems that this is sort of happening in very specific spaces, but of course hate crimes happen everywhere, and people are discriminated on different things, and the level of severity, of course, varies between things. And another case was where a trans woman was refused entrance to a club specifically because of the way she looked. So there are plenty of cases in Iceland, and I think, you know, the idea and the name of the event, the Queer Utopia, that people like to think that Iceland is such an open and an honest place, but there are still severe issues with really extreme cases of even violence in Iceland. But I guess what we need to think about is like, how can we combat this? And I really like that Katrin Oddsdottir gave really specific examples for the government on how to specifically do this. And I think there are many other things that the government and we as a society can do as well. And I think one of the most lacking things in Iceland is that there isn't research specifically on hate crimes and hate speech in Iceland, and there isn't specifically anything documented about it. When you Google hate crimes in Iceland, you don't find anything from the authorities or the police on hate crimes. You usually find something from queer organizations where they're trying to raise awareness of it. So I think research is a really, really fundamental part to be able to identify and to be able to know how to challenge these things. And Iceland needs to be more proactive in tackling hate crime and hate speech, both legally and in practice, because as I said before, queer people don't have the confidence in the authorities to take them seriously. And I think that's a really fundamental issue in our society. And queer people need to be able to seek their rights and not being worried about being discriminated against when they do so. And this includes that law enforcement and the authorities need more training, and they need to diversify among their staff, because as Thorberg was saying, there's, you know, very few queer people that hold any positions of actual influence in these institutions and are able to pinpoint these challenges that we need to take on. And I think currently the only place where you can actually report a hate crime against queer people is on the website of Samtökin, where there is a form where you can safely report a hate crime, and then they will help you with whatever steps you want to make. So I think there is a long way to go for us to be able to really take these things seriously and be able to identify them. And I think Iceland sometimes likes to think, because socially we are quite open, but that isn't quite enough. There needs to be something concrete, and it needs to be something identifiable in which we can do, and what steps people can take when they have experienced hate crime and hate speech in Iceland. And I think it's time to stop being a bit naive about how great Iceland is, and we really need to have a sober look at reality and see how we can move things forward and make things better for LGBTQI plus people in Iceland. Thank you.
Thank you. Takk fyrir, Ugla. Very good. Thank you. I think we're almost on time. We have our last speaker coming up here now. But after that, we will invite everybody to come up and take their places here, and we will have a discussion. But our last speaker comes originally from Uganda. Angel Pojara is an advocate of human rights. She came as an asylum seeker to Iceland in 2011 and now holds an Icelandic citizenship. Her talk is about seeking protection from persecution. Angel, please take to the stand. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. So I identify as a lesbian, and like it's been said, I've been here since 2011 and finally got my Icelandic citizenship. So I am speaking on behalf of refugees and asylum seekers. That is my topic tonight, my part in this conversation. And of course, this is an issue that is very close to my heart, seeing as I was an asylum seeker and a refugee and asylum seeker. And background story is, So I came to Iceland after leaving my home country because of my sexual orientation. And at the time I came from Uganda. They were actively seeking the anti-homosexuality bill, which basically was presented to Parliament on the fact that the laws that were already in place were not harsh enough to deal with LGBTQI plus people, and they were seeking things like the death penalty, life in jail, even though there was already like 7 to 14 years imprisonment prior to that. So coming to Iceland, some of my own personal experiences, let me just say that I just found out that there were actually no laws protecting LGBTI persons, refugees and asylum seekers coming to Iceland. This is news to me because of the fact that, you know, Iceland is so quite accepting and open-minded. So I just found this out. But then when I heard this, it took me back to some of my own personal problems or things that I experienced through the asylum process. And some of the problems I faced when I got here and was applying for asylum were, for example, during the interviewing process, where I was asked questions like, who is persecuting you? How would whoever is persecuting you know that you are a lesbian? And right now, looking back, I assume they said this because I am feminine identifying, and so who would know, right? But that is not the issue. Everybody deserves the same level of protection, regardless of if you're masculine identifying or if you're, you know, regardless. And so I was quite surprised by these questions, considering that at the time Uganda was really in the forefront fighting for the anti-homosexuality bill, and it seemed like Iceland had no idea, or the people that were interviewing me had no idea what was going on. And, you know, I pretty much thought, okay, this is going to be very easy. These are the steps. Everybody knows what's happening. You know, it's quite clear. I did not expect that I would be asked questions where I didn't have any tangible or physical answers, except for my word of mouth. That was my evidence. This is me. This is who I am. This is how I present. And fortunately, though, for me, I did have a few articles that were written with my pictures in them and things like this, which I did present. And I feel like that really strengthened my case. And I cannot imagine if I didn't have these things, you know, because then it's just my word of mouth. Who's going to believe me? Why should I even be believed? You know, am I just fleeing just for personal reasons, just seeking some kind of different life, or, you know? So, I had this evidence, and this in itself helped my case. You know, I remember meeting with my lawyer at the time, and just before we walked into the interview, she said to me, "So what is the situation in Uganda?" And I thought, really? We're walking into the interview and right now you ask me this, you know? And I was so glad that I had a few things together by myself. But I know that a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people don't have, you know, I say fortunately for me, but it was unfortunate because, you know, of course I was getting calls from back home. Are you, this is you, what is this about, you know? But what about the people that don't have newspaper articles, that don't have pictures of themselves, that declare that they are gay and things? How do they then go through the process? And when then you hear that there are no laws protecting people, you know, this in itself it instills fear. Like for me, I'm thinking I'm fearful for anybody else, because how do I know I'm going to be protected? Which was the issue as well for me back then. What if Iceland says no? Now I've already claimed asylum, and now I'm returning to a country where it's obviously going to be known that I've claimed asylum. I don't have protection. And I know that there are some refugees that do apply for asylum based on other reasons, because they're not sure of how to tread the waters. They're not sure of how safe they are to come out and say, this is me, this is who I am. And they will claim based on other reasons and then eventually decide, okay, let me take the chance. But by this point, already the authorities don't believe them, don't believe their stories, because you're switching your application now, you know? But I can understand the fear of not having that certainty and security that if I put in this claim, first of all, nobody is going to find out, number one. Secondly, they are going to protect me. They are going to look out for me. They're going to look after my rights, because we all come from a place of such fear where we have lived in shadows. We've been in the closet for so long. And it's not as simple as somebody's going to hate you. This could be life in jail. This could be death. So to come and share such an intimate part of you to authority figures, where you come from, your authority figures torture you, punish you, you know. So to come and share such an intimate part of you without knowing that you are definitely sort of like under a blanket of safety, that cannot work anymore, you know. Times are changing, you know. Asylum seekers come as well. They are placed in housing with other asylum seekers that are just as homophobic as they were from their home country. You know, these I feel are the two issues that need to be tackled, and that's why these laws are so important to put into place. That when other asylum seekers come, there can be some kind of education and sensitization to let them know that you cannot bully or discriminate or make other asylum seekers feel inferior, you know, especially LGBTQ persons, you know, because it is a very isolating situation as it is already. And to then feel isolated on top of that around fellow asylum seekers only leads to one thing, and that is depression. And with depression, then it's all the suicidal thoughts and suicidal tendencies. And, you know, it just goes downhill from there. So it is very important that these laws are put in place for safety purposes, for people to be able to come here and know that I can speak up for myself, I can be free, because that's all we all want, is just to be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. It's a great honor to have you with us here in Iceland. Now, and thank you all for your great contribution. And now I want to ask you and invite you that are present to take your position here where we can all see you, because we are moving on to the questions for the panelists. Maybe this one as well. Thank you. So, there are a few questions already. Great. Katrín, Þorbjörg, Bríet, and Angel. And Ugla is in the UK. Okay, we'll start with the two questions that we wanted to discuss here at the beginning. What would you urge Nordic cooperation to pay special attention to when it comes to efforts to promote equal rights, treatment, and opportunities of queer people in the Nordic region? In other words, what would be your best recommendation? And I will, throw this into the pool to all of you and ask you to keep it short. Þorbjörg, if you maybe would start, what
Sure.
would you think?
Yeah, so in line with the talk I just gave, invest in queer rights.
Yes, exactly.
Put some money into this struggle of ours. Money, time, and hire people that know what they're doing.
Yes, okay. Catherine, will you
Yeah.
reflect on this as well?
I will. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was listening to all your great talks, and thank you so much for the talks, thank you, Ugla, is that what I found, because I sometimes also fight with people who are disabled and are fighting for human rights in that genre, and one of the most important thing is, of course, consultation. The fact that they discovered the battle weapon of saying nothing about us without us, I think is extremely important.
Yeah.
And we can see this now. Maybe I think Bríetis talk was an excellent example of where we need to be going in regards to listening to the people that we're talking about in our policies.
Yes.
And not trying to save them in some way, but actually listening and then actually using their knowledge to make better policies. Because what people don't understand sometimes that are at the table of policy making is that you don't only make fairer policies by listening to the people you're talking about, you make better, cheaper and more clever policies. Yeah. So that I think would be one of the things I would recommend.
Bríet, do you agree with that?
Yes, yeah. Of course. Of course, nothing about us without us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but we need legal protection. We need orders to come from above.
Yeah.
We need to protect our children, and I think it's just pretty basic.
Yes, protect the children.
Protect
We've
the
heard
children.
that one before.
Yeah, great.
Angel, do you have points on this one?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think on top of that, I would say regular sensitization and education in terms of asylum seekers, for both staff who handle cases, staff that are interviewing the asylum seekers, and also for other asylum seekers that come into the country, because it's important to know that discrimination is unacceptable. So with laws in place and sensitization and education, I think we can go a long way.
Great. Ugla, could you reflect on that point as well?
Yeah, I think I agree with what everybody else has been saying. And I think there is also a step forward when, when laws and policies are actually put into place, they need to be implemented properly, and there needs to be a good and a consistent follow-up by the authorities. Because as we've seen, for example, with Lög om kynrænt sjálfræði, the Gender Autonomy Act, there have been various issues that have come up in relation to the implementation. And I feel like the government and the authorities need to be really clear in that they are dedicated to making it happening, and they are going to meet all the challenges head on, and they're going to make sure that the law is implemented in the way that it is supposed to. So on top of making sure you have policies and laws in place, you need to make sure that they're followed up properly and that it's done in the right way.
That the authorities take care of it, that we don't always have to do the fight ourselves,
Exactly.
that the authorities actually do the work for us in that sense. Okay, great. And the other question, what should Nordic cooperation avoid in order to obtain the goal of equal rights, treatment and opportunities for queer people in the Nordics? In other words, what would be your best advice? And maybe, if you have thought about that point, is there anybody who wants to start? Angel, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think becoming complacent in the idea or the notion that the laws that we have in place right now will suffice or that they're enough.
Yes.
I think that is very dangerous, and that it would be advisable to regularly review, because times keep changing, people keep changing, the economy, the world is never the same, and to constantly review and revisit the laws and update them to the needs of the people, of LGBT.
Yes, good point. Bríet, do you have anything on that point?
Yeah, I think Catherine worded it pretty well, but it's not the government's job to decide who is the expert. It's the people with a lived experience. Yeah. And don't decide who is the expert, because, and I'm speaking in circles.
It's
When discussing gay matters, talk to gay people.
Exactly.
When discussing trans matters, talk to trans people.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple.
What do you say, Þorbjörg, about this?
I completely agree with what you have been saying. And I also think that just listen, exactly like you were saying, listen to people. And so avoid feeling like you know it all. I think that's another thing, because I feel like a lot of people in Iceland, in every sector of society, and also within people that are politicians, feel like they know it all. Like I'm for gay rights,
yeah.
And that's probably usually it, So just people need to be ready to learn and be ready to reevaluate what they think they know, and and listen.
Yeah, to avoid getting into the trap of thinking you know it all.
Yeah, and I think that's also been, this is our problem, right? Because we have, like us that are trying to fight for queer rights, we are speaking to a society that feels like we've obtained every single right there is to get. So we kind of our first step is to let people know that, no, wait, like it isn't all there.
Yeah.
So that's a really weird situation to be in.
Ugla, on that point, what to avoid?
I think, when we have tools like the ILGA Rainbow Europe Map, I think a trap some people fall into is making it a tick box exercise, that you just have to tick all these things and then everything's great. But this is only a tool that we can use as a guidance for legal rights, and all countries have cultural things that are quite relevant. So you need to be able to think of the bigger picture and think of the social aspects as well. And just because you have certain rights in place, which Iceland doesn't even have, according to the map, you still need to move a bit further, and you need to have real dedication that goes beyond some sort of tokenism or some sort of box ticking exercise, I think.
Katrin?
Yep, I think, listening to all of you, I think what I would like to say is avoid a certain level of political dishonesty, really. Because, like in Iceland, for example, we tend to pride ourselves about the situation here, but then we look at our stats in regards to our legislation, and I think we need to be a little bit more honest in the way we portray our nation state outwards. In regards to these findings, we need to say, okay, yes, there are certain things great in Iceland, but we need to be doing a lot better, and we need to hear our policymakers saying this to believe that they want to do it. And I want to stress one more thing. Human rights, like the ones we're speaking about here on behalf of our group, is not something for us. It's for society as a whole. We're not asking you to do us the favor of giving us right. We're asking you to make society more whole and better by giving everybody rights. And I think we the policymakers of this Nordic, whatever it's called, should definitely focus on that this is not a question of some mercy that they're going to provide to us, the queer people. This is a matter of making the societies that they belong to better.
Queer rights are human rights. So, the questions have been coming in. We have 2 questions here. Is it clear, that's the question, is it clear that there is complete social acceptance? Does everyone have to have a steady partner or kids to be accepted? Does anybody want to? Þorbjörg, maybe, if you want to.
Yeah, sure. No, of course not. Like, we do say, and I do recognize that I speak from a point of privilege as well. I fit really kind of neatly into society's norms, while still having a wife. But as you may have noted, the wife, like we did go into the institution of marriage and so on, and that is not the case for many queer people. Many queer people want to have multiple partners, do not want to have kids, want to be, out and proud and really, really visible, and want to be radical, and there should be room for all of us.
Totally.
So it's
but
really.
Do you feel there is acceptance or to everything?
I think, well, there is acceptance, but it's true that does have its limitations, and people that are further down the margins do, of course, experience much more prejudice in their daily lives than people who don't or who aren't as much marginalized. So no, this is actually a really, really good point, because we've been talking about the societal acceptance and so on, and this is often because the surveys that I referenced in my talk it's usually how do you feel about having I guess gay neighbors, or how do you feel about gay marriage and so on. It doesn't really go into the depths of how prejudice works. So it's true. These stats are superficial.
Bria, do you have anything to say about that? Do you think that there is social acceptance if you're not only in a stable relationship, or if you're, not showing off your kids or your grandchildren, like in my case?
Well, socially, more or less.
Yeah.
There will always be some exceptions.
Yeah.
And that is what matters, because in the daily life you can maybe have pretty normal life, but you fear the exceptions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Angel, how do you feel coming into the Icelandic society about the acceptance of queer people?
With my background, to me, this is, if it's a scale of 0 to 10, for me, Iceland is like a 9, but then you get into the deeper roots of it, and you realize, okay, it's a bit fractured.
Yes, exactly.
But, just having conversations like this obviously is making, it makes a difference. But I do feel, personally, I feel that, marriage, it gives that blanket of stability, single, maybe not so much, but we should all have our space and our freedom. That's what it all boils down to.
There is another question here. Queer people on disability and job security. Many queer people on disability are discriminated against on the job market. What can be done about this? With the new technology, many minorities are left behind. What are your suggestions? Katrin, maybe, if you can
I think
reflect on this.
Yep, I think always because we're talking about policy making, right? Yeah. So always when you have this powerful position of being able to actually form policies, you have to think about multi-layered discrimination like that. When maybe you're a woman and you are queer and then you're disabled, and your chances of actually succeeding next to a person who has none of those marginalized categories on their person are actually less, and it's just a fact. And I think this is a great point, whoever raised it, is actually pointing out the problems which come with multiple discrimination due to factors that you have absolutely no control over. And we, of course, are facing problems in that regard in Iceland. And like I said, I have studied a little bit the situation for disabled people in Iceland, and we have a long way to go. And I think us people who have actually fought this very successful human rights battle in the queer society should definitely join forces with everybody else who's marginalized and because of something that they cannot control, and help in any way we can. Yeah. So I just would suggest that we would somehow join forces and really try to pick that up, that question, and do something. I don't know what.
It's actually in the laws of Samtökin 78.
Okay.
That we are to help other human or like other people that are struggling for human rights and gain their support and so we are definitely, or at least Samtökin 78 or the queer organization of Iceland is mindful of these things, but we definitely need to do better. We always need to do
Anybody else want to? No? Well, we have two more questions. The time is running out, but we will try to finish these two before wrapping up. First question, how much money are we expecting to need to see a healthy change? I think this is for Þorbjörg. And can the average person help, and how can the average person help?
Okay.
Investing in
Yes,
queer
okay.
rights.
No, start by investing time. Talk to that, you know, the uncle at the dinner party. You
Yeah.
know, stop them when they no. Okay, how much money? I cannot name a number. You need to talk to the you need to talk to Daniel, the executive director, about these things, about these like really, really specific things. But what average people can do, well, of course, they can become a member of Samtökin. They can support any of the queer organizations that are active in Iceland, but of course, Samtökin as well. You can become a rainbow friend, regnbogavinur, and then you give like a monthly contribution to our organization, and so on. But what I think is what is most important is that people do speak up and become part of the change.
Yes. Anybody else? Ugla, you want to reflect on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Stodberg says, there's a lot of things that people can do. And, you know, it's about donating money where you can. It's about supporting organizations that you can. And it's also about, you know, the joke that Stodberg said at the beginning, you know, to talk to the uncle at the Christmas party. I mean, it might seem like a joke, but it actually is something that people need to be doing. You need to be challenging homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, racism, ableism, anything where you see it in your near surroundings, because we can make a lot of change within our own circles. And that's all a part of the bigger picture. So I think we need to be proactive, and we need to be open, and we need to be vocal about our support, because our, you know, people who are against LGBT people are quite vocal about it. So we need to be quite vocally supportive. And I think there's many ways to do that as well.
Great. Last question. Steve Biko said, changes come through policy and education. And the question is, are there trans or intersex LGBT persons in the leadership positions in the arts and business? Do we have any trans or intersex or LGBT QI plus people in leadership nowadays?
In arts and business,
yes,
specifically?
In arts and business specifically.
My wife used to be the chairperson of the Reykjavík City Theatre. I don't know if that's the question people are looking for, but or the answers. But I mean, people, I think, should be allowed to not identify what they are. You know, I'm sure there are loads of people in Iceland who are chairing all sorts of stuff that have something different from completely hetero profile in their heart or in their identification. But I don't know. What we can do is be vocal, and maybe that was the sort of slightly nerdish way we were introducing ourselves in the beginning. Looking back, it looks a little bit nerdish, I guess. It maybe is to do this, that we're talking here and we have a specific open profile about our minority status that we want to share, because we do believe that it has certain knowledge along with it, you know, that we have a lived experience because of who we are and what we are. Mm-hmm. And of course we want to see people of every different marginalized perspective running the show in different areas. But I think the biggest thing we should want to see is just stopping to categorize everybody and, you know, all the time. Why would we always look at a person and think like, okay, they are this. I think as soon as we move away from that in the end, although we do need it now to finish the struggle, we will sort of stop obsessing about each other's profiles and just start more listening to each other as human beings.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Yeah, very good point. We have now a trans politician in Belgium doing really well, leading the government there. So that was quite a nice thing to see. Mm-hmm. So that was great. Well, we've come to the end of this, and we don't have time for more questions. The effort to arrange this meeting today sprung from the cooperation of Nordic Ministers of Equality, with the aim of strengthening the protection and improving the lives of queer people throughout the region. And what have we learned today? I'm going to try to sum up very quickly a little bit from all your talks. I've learned a lot, and that's you know why I really wanted to be here, because I needed to learn. Well, Katrín Jakobsdóttir talked about what the government is doing, and there seems to be a lot they are doing at the moment. They really want to get us further up on that map, the ILGA map, many bills going through focusing on queer people, but it is an ongoing fight. And she talked about how she believes in policy. Gisle talked to us from Norway about his role as a key listener in the meetings, and he still feels that we have a long way to go, which was interesting to hear, and it will be interesting to see what he comes up with when he writes his report. Katrin Oddsdóttir talked about being grateful for being born in Iceland. She went briefly through the gay and queer history in Iceland in 2 minutes. Well done. She put emphasis on the fight and on activism. And she talked about the comparison between Iceland and Malta. But her basic line was, to the government, finish the job. Yeah. Þorbjörg Þorvaldsdóttir talked about the gap between acceptance and our legal rights. And she talked about Iceland as being leaders when it comes to social acceptance. But we have lots of problems. And she talked, but in terms of the law, for example, when it comes to hate speech, conversion therapy is not banned in Iceland. And there's nothing in the law about queer asylum seekers. And she talked about the importance of investing in queer rights, both time and funds. Bríet Finnsdóttir gave their story about their childhood. It was a shocking own story that they told us here. And how their parents were told not to tell anyone about their status. And their basic message at the end was to the medical profession, don't do harm and let us be. Yes? Ugla, thank you for talking with us from the UK, talked about the problem of hate speech on media platforms and how the law does not protect marginalized groups like trans. And the problem is also how the media itself doesn't react to this kind of hate speech. Hate crimes are on the rise worldwide, also in Iceland. Queer people don't trust the authorities. They don't report these crimes. And we need more research and we need more diversity in the authorities, in the police. And Angel talked at the end, told us her story, which was very, very interesting. And she talked about the need to educate and the need for the asylum authorities to know better what basically they are talking about and to understand better where people are coming from and what their situation is. Excellent. I hope I did some justice to what you gave us here today. This has been an excellent, excellent afternoon. And I thank you all for following this hybrid seminar, which is initiated by the Nordic Council of Ministers and organized by Samtökin 78, the queer organization of Iceland, and the Nordic House in Reykjavík. And I especially want to thank Fanney Karlsdóttir at the Nordic House and Heiðrún Fífilstad from Samtökin 78 for the great effort in making this happen here in Reykjavík. I want to tell you that those of you that are in Reykjavík, that there's an exhibition here in the Nordic House in the basement. It's called Underneath and deals with gender and gender ideas. It's open, and more about it on the homepage of the Nordic House. I think they allowed 10 people in at the time. We look forward, of course, like I said before, to see the report by Gisle after all similar Nordic events and how it will affect the work on behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers for increased rights and well-being of queer persons within all the Nordic countries. Things are changing fast, but remember that nothing changes unless we follow it through, support each other, and stick together as a queer family. An attack on one of us is an attack on us all. Please follow on Facebook and Instagram for Nordic news and seminars, for example, the Nordic House in Reykjavík, and of course the info published by Samtökin 78. And finally, thank you so much for today. Thank you all. Bless, bless from the Nordic House. Bless, bless.